This audio program is presented by Audible.com. Audible, audio that speaks to you wherever you are.
Tantor Audio presents Crash and Burn by Artie Lange with Anthony Bozza. Narrated by Sean Renette. Forward. The buck stops here. I must admit, for the first few days after Artie called to ask me to write this forward, I was confused. A few questions bounced around in my mind. How did he get my number? Is that on the internet now, too? Why me? Was I next on his list after Bin Laden? Not available? What can I possibly bring that someone more qualified, like Bigfoot, can't? After wrestling with the enormity of this task for a bit, I decided to give it a shot, because Artie and I have an interesting past. In case you didn't know, he was a guest on my first HBO show in the summer of 2009. With all due respect to the Mayan calendar and its prediction of doom in 2012, that day sure as hell felt for a while like the end of the world to me. I was told by Artie that his appearance on my show is covered in this book, so I won't go into too much detail about that night. However, it would be weird for me not to give my perspective. First, let me state that I, Joe Buck, was the one who had him at the top of the list for potential guests for the final segment of the show, which was to be a panel of comedians. I've been a fan of the Stern Show for a long time, and I knew Artie to be brilliantly funny, as well as a huge, smart sports fan. The asks went out, and Artie was one of the first to say yes. I was thrilled. Hell, I was happy to hear that anyone wanted to be on my show. Word came back that he was a fan of my father's work and that he really wanted to do it. Considering how it turned out, all I can say is it's too bad my dad wasn't around to host. In the end, the panel consisted of Artie, Paul Rudd, and Jason Sudeikis, and to me, that was a solid lineup. Before the show, which was live, I went to the green room specifically to seek out Artie. I wanted to introduce myself and to let him know how big a fan of his I was. It isn't tailor-made hindsight to say that he was what anyone would call jumpy when I went in to say hi, and the look in his eyes was a bit unsettling. That said, I specifically told him that when he got out there he should light me up, give me shit, and bust my balls, because I could handle it. At least that's what I thought. I wanted the show to have some edge, and I wanted it to be different from any other sports talk show on cable, past or present. We didn't get there the way I hoped, but I think we accomplished that goal at least, huh? If you don't know what I'm talking about, a quick internet search, which my daughters have been forbidden to do, will fill in the blanks. Artie did exactly what I asked, and exactly what he was booked to do. And so began the longest 10 minutes of my life. Artie lit me up. He had fun at my expense. And you know what? So what? It was a live show on HBO, at night. He was raw, he was uncensored, and he was offensive. He was everything you can't be on a primetime network, but could be on cable. Yet somehow the network that airs highbrow classics like Pornucopia, Cat House, G-String Divas, Taxicab Confessions, Real Sex, and Hookers on Ice got mad. Like they say on Stern when things are unfair, wah. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy to take. But if Artie was messed up on horse tranquilizers, heroin, or just too much pudding, looking back, I really don't care. In his mind, as a comedian, he was booked to be funny on a cable channel that airs comedy specials from Chris Rock and Ricky Gervais and a long list of guys who say whatever the hell they want, however the hell they want, so why wouldn't he swing for the fences? Comedians on HBO are even allowed to say curse words. Gasp. What else was Artie Lange supposed to do? Tell knock-knock jokes fit for a Girl Scouts meeting? He had to go for it. And he did. Was he harsh and over the line? Absolutely. Was he so cruel that he made me cry or truly pissed me off? Absolutely not. 2 days after the show, I asked HBO for whatever contact information they had for Artie, and I called him. I wanted him to know that I bore him no ill will and that I appreciated him coming on the show, no matter how it had turned out. I needed to let him know that as far as I was concerned, it was water under the bridge, and I was just happy to have met him after listening to him on Stern for so long. He said that he'd gotten that first laugh and got a bit carried away, and that he was sorry if his appearance had hurt my chances for the show to continue. He followed with, "Anything I can do to help you going forward, I will. I owe you that." I took him up on that by asking if he would shoot the cold open for our next show. We'd do it in Times Square. He and I would appear together, and we'd poke fun at the incident and put it all to bed. The rest of the conversations, especially those with HBO, will be in my book someday. Not this one. Artie agreed, and a few days later he and I stood in Times Square for an hour and a half, shooting out in the open with hundreds of people filing past. He was great, and it was good to see him. The bit we shot killed in the room when it aired, and after the show a high-ranking executive admitted to me that it was the right thing to do. It was over. Well, except for the fact that every 2 weeks to this day someone yells out, "Artie Lange," at me as I enter a stadium somewhere. Once I got a Twitter account, I also found that, on average, every 14th tweet I receive would refer to Artie and HBO, and probably always will. Fun. It's the moment that has no death. I don't know Artie that well, but what I do know of him, I like. No matter how many Stern shows you've listened to, or how many times you've seen Beer League or Dirty Work, or seen him do stand-up, you don't know him well either. We don't know these larger-than-life celebrities as much as we think we do. Even though he revealed a lot about his life on the show every day, we don't know what shoots through his mind when he is on stage, or ordering a hooker, or contemplating a quick 8-ball before bed. He is a complex dude who has a whirring mind that spins faster than most. As a listener, I found his intelligence remarkable. He's a great mimic. Think George Takei. He can remember lyrics from songs and lines from movies better than most. Think Godfather. And he seems willing to lend money to people who need it, even when he knows he probably won't get it back. Think Interns. He comes off like someone who would be a good friend. The kind of guy who would give you and a buddy the shirt off his back. I like that type of guy. The world needs more of them. I read his first book and found out he was a mama's boy who worshipped his dad, the man who introduced him to baseball. That sounded a lot like how I grew up. After the family suffered the tragedy with his father and his paralysis, obviously Artie's life took a dark turn. But under all the hurt and the self-destructive behavior lies a good guy with a big heart who wants to do right. He is assisted in his career by his sister, and still leans on his mom for help. Again, a lot like I do. I root for the guy, and I believe anyone who listened to his daily morning brilliance during his tenure on the Stern Show probably does as well. By the way, that show is like a test to me. For its critics, it's easy to dismiss as trashy and vulgar. I maintain you have to listen through the bluster and outrageous conversation to hear the way they root for each other and get along. There's a lot of heart and honesty to that show, and you don't have to listen long to really hear it. There's no denying that Artie rocked my world when he appeared on my show. There is also no denying that I am there to help him if he ever needs it. We have a bond that is weird, but since it gets brought up to me over and over again, I've come to understand it. That's a good thing, because it probably won't go away. So why fight it? Artie has written 2 books now. That means he has asked for 2 forwards to precede his stories. Only Howard Stern and I have had that honor. That's cool to me. This forward represents my version of closure. No, not the part of Artie's go-to pants that have been reinforced more than once, but closure to the perceived feud between a guy who broadcasts a lot of Yankee games and a guy who bets on a lot of them. Enjoy this book, and if you haven't read it, go enjoy the first. And while we're at it, here's to Artie's next book, a hat trick that will be a combination of the first 2. Too Fat to Burn. Oh, and Artie? Fuck you. Love, Joe. Joe Buck, July 2012. Introduction. Dale would not be proud. All I can say is that you only realize how big your mountain is once you're laying motionless, helpless, and hopeless in the valley below. No one goes there on purpose, if you get what I'm saying, because the only way to find your personal low is to slip and roll down that mountain of yours, straight through to the bottom, no holds barred. Only when you're in that ditch, lying there in the muddy runoff you've made of your life, gazing up at the peak you fell from, do you truly know how small you are, and understand how tall you used to be. Down there at the bottom you can finally see the invisible zigzag path you followed, reliving every lump you took along the way. You feel the pain of each one again, and some others for the first time, as behind you the avalanche you've made of your life crashes toward you in slow motion, engulfing the people you care about, stifling you with the debris of your existence. The view from that gully is a front-row seat to the mess you've made, but it's not the kind of show you want to see up close and personal. If you're lucky, and if you want to, if you've got the strength and good people willing to pick up what remains of you in your life, you can make it out alive and climb back into the world. If any of you listening to this feel like you're close to that pit, please keep listening. I've done your homework for you. At least I hope so. Because I'd like to think the time I spent out of my mind will do someone some good. My life changed, so in the end it did me some good, but if I can keep just one person from suffering a fraction of what I had to, then it wasn't all for nothing. And that means something. I crashed and burned. I rolled all the way down my fucking hill, man, and I did it in a very big way. It was a slow slide at first, easy enough to ignore, but in the end it was a race to the end, and I lapped my best time. Only now can I see just how far back my slip and slide to gutter town took me. I gotta be honest, sometimes I'm impressed with myself, because I held out for a pretty long time going pretty damn hard before I fucked up good enough to wake up. Now that I've had enough time to think about it, now that I'm alive again for all practical purposes, sorry, artiesdeathwatch.com, I can pinpoint the moment that my descent began. Nobody slipped me that one pill that sent me over the edge. It's not that kind of thing I'm talking about. I mean the moment when I began to let duplicity rule my life, when lying to myself and to others, to whatever degree necessary, became completely acceptable to me. I didn't even shrug at it anymore. That's when I turned the corner into hell. I can tell you where it happened, and aside from my blackouts, what happened, but I don't know the why of this shit, only the how. So bear with me. I'm doing my best. It was November 9th, 2006. I was standing on stage at Carnegie Hall, one of the most prestigious concert venues in the world. It was built in 1891 and has hosted more talent than heaven. Back then, I was still with my ex-girlfriend Dana, whom any fan of the Stern Show during my tenure there knows far too much about. At that time, she and I had been together for 5 years, and we were starting to get very serious. I felt that she was probably the only girl who would marry me, and so I thought pretty soon I'd do something about that. At least I knew I should do something about it. Anyway, because of the Stern Show, my stand-up career had taken off, and I was booked to play the most beautiful room that any dickhead comic like me could ever dream to play. It's almost wrong that they book comics there, because the place is far too beautiful for those walls to hear what I say to get laughs. But there I was, and it was a peak achievement for me. I hope to relive it someday and feel the warmth of those stage lights on me again. They didn't feel like any other lights that have ever shined on me, including the blue and red of law enforcement. At the time, Dana and I were fighting, mostly because of my habits, which were far from good. I was a decently functioning alcoholic and drug addict, with a concentration in heroin, coke, and whiskey. Really? I'd say I was cheating on Dana with heroin. That dirty opiate bitch will do that to you. Ask any addict. I'd been fucking up regularly and obviously, so by then our relationship was dangling by a thread. We hadn't seen each other at all in the weeks leading up to the show, and things were so tense I wasn't even sure she'd show up. I didn't know if we were going to stay together. I didn't know if she'd even say yes if I asked her to marry me. All I knew was that I wanted her there to see me play Carnegie Hall. Even if we didn't stay together, it was such a special occasion and such a landmark for me that I needed her there, plain and simple, because she was so important in the grand scheme of my life. She was like another limb to me. The gig also happened to fall on her birthday, so it was a coup to get her there considering the circumstances. My good friends, the great comedians Joe Matarese, Jimmy Florentine, and Craig Fitzsimmons opened the show and killed. Howard Stern and a lot of people from the Stern Show were there, as were many members of my family. I pulled out all the stops for my set. I did over an hour, and I had my equivalent of pyrotechnics. I showed some sketches I'd done at Mad TV on the big screen and worked them into my routine. I'm not lying at all. Everything went over great, and I totally killed. But that wasn't Dana's birthday surprise. I mean, I don't know, maybe she was surprised that I did so well, but she had another thing coming. The last bit in my set was something I'd done the first time I did an open mic stand-up just a few blocks away from Carnegie Hall. I was 19 at the time, and this occurred at the original Improv, which was 13 blocks away on 9th Avenue and 44th Street. It was a song parody, which was appropriate for the acoustics, based on the theme song to the show Cheers, if it were a gay bar in Boston called Queers. And here's how it goes. Going to bars where everyone's straight gets to be a rut. You want to go where you can get rammed in the butt, and Judy Garland's all they play. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows you're gay, and they're not afraid to say, when I look at his ass, I lick my chops, and all the bar stools have no tops. You want to go where everybody knows... And then I pointed the mic toward the audience, and the sold-out crowd at Carnegie Hall shouted, "You're gay!" That's not the first time a large group of people has looked at me and shouted, "You're gay," I said. It happened to me once at a family wedding in front of my Italian uncles when I was on the dance floor sucking a cock. That was the perfect warm-up to bring up Dana for her birthday. Hey, any Stern Show fans here? Honestly, that was the most unnecessary question anybody could ask that room. The place roared. So you guys know about my girlfriend Dana, then, I said. More uproar. So it's Dana's birthday today, and she's here. Dana came on stage, and I wasn't sure if she wanted to kill me or kiss me. But everyone was happy to see her in that way that fans of the Stern Show are always happy to see anyone that they've gotten to know over the air. Dana is not a ham in any way, so this degree of attention, right up there in her face, got her blushing redder than a whore in church. It got much worse when I instructed all 3,000 in attendance to sing her happy birthday. You can call me corny, you can call me Al, I don't give a fuck. I was trying to win some points with her, and it seemed like the best way to show her I cared. She was past her last straw with me, which demanded a giant gesture on my part, and as humble as she is, she loved it. I saw it in her eyes as she left the stage to a standing ovation. But that was the end of us. That very night was all she wrote. Even if it had all worked out, it still would have been a sham, because I did the whole show with 2 bags of heroin in my pocket, despite the fact that I'd sworn to her I was clean at the time. I don't think the hall's patron, Andrew Carnegie, would have approved of me performing while holding smack, as they used to say on Starsky and Hutch. I gotta say it's pretty pathetic, because I didn't even need the heroin to get through the show. I wasn't even close to being that far gone. I still had all of that to look forward to. I just had those bags to celebrate, because at that point in my life I still enjoyed it, and I thought heroin was cool. Now, there was more to it than that. I fucking loved the escape and the long good night that it brought. I had disrespected Dana by lying about my use, and I disrespected the hall. I could have stashed it off stage in my bag or something. I didn't need to have the drugs in my pocket while I was performing. But I did, because at the time I thought doing that was cool too. The heroin was a time bomb in my pocket, or an exotic animal I couldn't afford to feed forever. It was a fever I had to tend but continued to ignore. At that point in my life, playing Carnegie Hall was the most significant thing I'd ever done. But as soon as the lights went down, all I could think about was the heroin. After the show, I rushed through greeting my friends, family, and peers with the same enthusiasm I muster up ordering a Whopper at Burger King. They were all in my way because all I wanted was to get to my hotel and sniff a few lines of heroin. It was great when I did. I hoovered up those lines at the speed of snort. I didn't have a problem. I was only extending the high of the show all night long. After that pit stop, I continued to the after-party, which was at the legendary Caroline's about 8 blocks away. They had a car reserved for me, but since it was a beautiful and unseasonably warm night, and because I was now high on heroin, I led a pack of my friends there on foot. It was a fun party, and it seemed like Dana was having fun. I hoped so, because I was intent on getting her back for good, which was why I had booked a room at the Ritz-Carlton overlooking Central Park that night. But nothing was going to save us, because Dana knew I was high. She always knew when I was high, because she knew me better than anyone. But even strangers with a rudimentary knowledge of heroin behavior would have known I was high that night. I was all over the place. This next sentence would make no sense outside of the comedy world, but in context it's further proof of just how high I was. Howie Mandel showed up, and I shook his hand. Howie Mandel is a great guy, but anyone in the business and most of his fans know that he is the world's biggest germaphobe. He doesn't shake hands. Ever. And that's the most normal, socially acceptable custom of his. So I did that. Went in for the shake, and completely shat on his parade. The guy looked like he'd seen a ghost, and I've wondered just how long he boiled that limb to get my cooties off when he got home. Dana and I left Caroline's at about 2 a.m. and took a cab to the Ritz-Carlton, and by the time we got there, we were in a cage match-style fight. She was mad, and she had every right to be, and there was no talking us into making up. I kept at it anyway. Half fighting, half apologizing, until finally she couldn't take any more and wanted to go home. I had gotten us this incredible suite to celebrate and hopefully begin again. But at that point I didn't care. Fuck it, I said. Fine. Let's go. I drove her home, completely high on dope, which is something I did a lot, I'm ashamed to say. After I dropped her off in Jersey, I drove back to the Ritz and sat alone in my gorgeous $1,200 a night room, looking out on Central Park, sipping champagne, and snorting heroin all by myself until the sun came up. If that isn't a cover story worthy of Loser magazine, I don't know what is. Eventually I nodded off, but awoke at 9 a.m., depressed and still high. I couldn't look at those four walls anymore, so I hit the streets and wandered aimlessly around Midtown Manhattan. I ate breakfast at the Astro restaurant on 6th Avenue. 2 eggs over easy, home fries, and a side of pancakes, plus a big, fat glass of chocolate milk, because I love chocolate milk when it's served in a diner. I loved the food, and I hated myself. I walked out of there and bought the New York Post and the Daily News. Then I went down to the subway and rode around on the C and A trains, like Charlie Parker used to, only without the genius talent. I spent about 2 hours hopping trains, just reading the papers. I didn't shower before leaving the hotel, and I'd been up all night, so I probably looked broke and homeless, when in reality, the night before, I'd earned $50,000 playing Carnegie Hall. When I couldn't ignore life anymore, I went home. And when I got there and looked in the mirror, I realized that my relationship with Dana was truly over. And I knew why. I knew exactly why. Motherfucking drugs. Drugs are the cheapest kind of magic. They make life amazing for about 3 hours a day, and for that miracle, they make the other 21 a complete living hell. Drugs ain't worth it, because they may be a motorboat to some kind of paradise island, but their wake creates a tidal wave of shit. I was starting to smell that tide rolling in, but I was still dead set on surfing it. Who the fuck am I kidding? In November 2006, I was like Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now, screaming at the top of my lungs to put the goddamn helicopter down so I could surf that shit tide myself. Chapter 1. My Life as a Prizefighter. By the end of my 11-year career on the Howard Stern Show, by my count, I had gotten into a fight with literally every single person that worked for the show. These weren't one-round, back-and-forth sparring matches. These were heavyweight insult slugfests with low blows, no rules, and blood on the canvas by the end of them. They went way beyond the acceptable level of shit-giving and taking that defines the Stern universe, because I drove them there directly. I could get under the skin of the most good-natured member of the crew on their happiest day because that's just what I do. If I decided they were out to get me somehow, or just decided that I didn't like them, probably because they seemed happy, and I was a miserable drug addict who got a perverse thrill from destroying every good thing in his life, I would lock onto my victim like a pit bull, keep at it until I found their soft spot, and force them to lose their temper in a very uncharacteristic way. I could make people become someone they didn't like, which suited me fine because I didn't like myself either. During my descent, I may not have been the best co-host, but I was one hell of a fighter, a slouching tiger, sleeping dragon, if you will. I might spend half a show sleeping, in other words, nodding off on heroin, but I'd wake up with more energy than an angry terrorist, ready to rail away at my target until I reduced them to the level of anger, loathing, insecurity, and frustration that I felt every single non-high hour of my day. Like I said, anger was a sick thrill for me. It got me going, it blew off steam, and it made me feel alive. And obviously I didn't care about the consequences it had on the relationships in my life, so it became a bit of a hobby. The kind of hobby your friends have that you wish they didn't. Usually those friends aren't too receptive when you try to tell them that collecting paintings by serial killers isn't going to get them laid. I got into a fight with Robin. I got into a fight with Gary. I got into a fight with Fred. I got into a fight with Sal. I got into a fight with Richard. I even got into a fight with Howard. How the fuck did I think that was okay? I got into so many fights on the air that they made a Best of Artie's Fights special after I was gone that they still replay all the time. I know this because every time it airs, if I go outside at all that day, even for just 5 minutes, someone in a passing car will roll their window down and shout at me about it. This sounds bad, but it isn't. Usually they're informing me of this in a good way. The most famous of these fights was quite the spectacle, even in audio form, and if you're lucky or cursed enough to have seen the video of this event, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Aside from all that, this incident is significant because it marks a major downturn in my efficiency as a functioning drug addict. I am referring to a fight that stands alone. My battle royale with my old assistant, Teddy. In April of 2008, I completely lost it on Teddy one day on the air. I insulted him. I threatened him. I made fun of him in every way possible. And I topped it all off by throwing a cup of water at him. I'd been munching painkillers like they were Tic Tacs all night, so I was flying high that morning. I was also pretty exhausted. I'd been keeping up the schedule that drove me into the ground and had played a big L.A. gig that month, after which I planned to relax and wean myself off the drugs, which would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, I went to Amsterdam. One of the Stern Show producers, Jason Kaplan, was having a 4-day bachelor party there, and great people were going, including Howard TV cameraman Brian Phelan, who was one of my favorite people from the show to hang out with. The flight out was that night, just a few hours after our blow-up. On the show that morning, Howard asked about the trip and if we were all packed and ready to go. I remembered that I'd asked Teddy to make a copy of my passport so he'd have all of my information handy for filling out customs forms and in case I lost it, which was a distinct possibility. Teddy was, after all, my assistant, and these are the kinds of tasks assistants are told to do if they aren't on top of it enough to think of these things themselves, which was definitely the case with my flunky manservant. The number of times Teddy didn't do the things he should have done is almost as legendary as the number of times I fell asleep on the air during my last year on the show. But no matter what he did, I believed in Teddy because I liked the kid a lot and wanted him to be all that he could be. So that day, I expected that he'd done what I'd asked him to. regardless of his track record. A couple of hours into the show, during a break, a kid who worked at Sirius, not even on our show, came up to me, handed me my passport, and told me he'd found it in the copier machine, where Teddy had apparently left it. This was a major fuck-up, even for him, because if someone hadn't found that and returned it, we would have gone to the airport and I would have been completely fucked. We would have missed the plane, because there was no way in hell I'd let Teddy go and have fun if I couldn't, and by the time we got ourselves over there, we would have probably lost 2 days. At first, I just thought it was funny. Shit happens. We all do dumb shit, and I've done shit that's dumber than most. Luckily, my dumb shit has turned out okay. Most of the time. So with that in mind, I did what any self-respecting wise-ass would do if their friend, let alone their paid assistant, fucked up that big. I started busting Teddy's balls. During the next commercial break, I went and found him and started laying into him in a pretty light-hearted way that was nowhere close to how rude I'd been to him in the past for lesser crimes. I considered it a gentle teasing, which he deserved, to say the least, but it didn't take long for this exchange to turn into something violent. It literally took one cross word from Teddy. After the break, back on the air, I told Howard what he'd done. And when Teddy heard me, he barged into the studio to defend himself. He was offended and defensive and took no blame, and this flipped my crazy switch, shifting my tone in the argument from civil to insane. I was outraged that Teddy wasn't at all apologetic. I really couldn't believe it. To me, there is no excuse for leaving your boss's passport in a copy machine that everyone in our office, which is huge, has access to. I wasn't going to let him make any kind of excuse because there was none. I went right at the punk, because that's what he was to me at that point, and brought up the fact that he owed me $2,000. The exchange that ensued was crazy. I started calling him gay because one time he'd shortened the word Bloomingdale's to Bloomies. Who says that? I asked. He might be gay. My reasoning was twofold. I dropped my mother and sister off at Bloomingdale's, but I'd never been inside, I'm proud to say. The fact that Teddy had been in there multiple times and had adopted a nickname for the place was suspect. Referring to it as Bloomies? I had a huge problem with that. Who says that? He's such a pussy. I took that train of thought to the wall and still wasn't done because by then pure anger and hatred were streaming out of me. Things escalated until I reached my breaking point, which was the moment Teddy said that I forced the money on him. Forced. It's still an insane notion. And in my state, that was it. I was out of control, pissed off. I'd loaned him the money, but the way he talked about it that morning sounded as if he felt entitled to it and didn't feel he had to pay it back. I fucking lost it, and all hell broke loose. Before I go on, I'd like to emphasize that I overreacted here, and I do apologize once again to Teddy. Anyway, I threw my water at him and dove across the desk, hoping to get my hands around his neck. I missed pretty badly on both counts, so I got up, sending my chair crashing into the wall, and ran after him, because by then he was out of there. It was the fastest I'd ever seen him do anything. Benji, who's a comedy writer I love and adore, who wrote jokes for Howard and sat right next to me for years, tried to stop me, but he couldn't. As fat as I am, I'm strong as hell, especially when I'm angry. So as Teddy ran for his life, Ronnie, Gary, and a few interns worked together to hold me back. Hands down, this was my worst moment on the air, which is saying a lot considering my track record. Still, I know some of you stern freaks out there probably think it's the best thing you've ever heard. As much as I think you're sick fucks, I hope you weirdos never change. As I saw Teddy get away, I became more of a maniac by that point, enraged and inconsolable, and underneath it all, embarrassed and ashamed. I saw Howard in the middle of it, and stopped in my tracks, finally realizing what I'd done and what I was still doing. I wasn't close to cooling down, but I had a moment of clarity. Howard and the show meant so much to me. and in that flash I forgot whatever whirlwind of hate I was caught up in and got some perspective. I stopped struggling. I stopped yelling, and I went and hugged him. "I don't deserve to be here after this, Howard," I said. I was struggling to hold back my tears. "I'm sorry I disrespected you, and I'm sorry I disrespected the show. Goodbye. I don't deserve to be here." There was about an hour remaining in the broadcast when I stormed out. And I'd never done that before, even on my worst days. I got out of the elevator and onto the street, thinking that I'd resigned because I'd meant what I said. I didn't deserve to be there. I spent the rest of the day walking up and down 6th Avenue, completely out of it. After a few hours with nowhere to go, I went to the movies and tried to doze off and forget about my life. I have no idea what I saw. I just remember people in the theater yelling at me because my cell phone kept ringing as calls and texts from concerned people came in. "I know what you're thinking, but come on, you really think I know how to put that shit on mute? I just found out about this thing they call email." Everyone in my life called me that afternoon. All of them trying to stop me from going on the trip. But that wasn't going to happen. I was so determined to carry on that I would have told the President of the United States or Greg Nettles himself that we'd have to have dinner another time because there was a bachelor party in Amsterdam that I had to get to. So that evening, with all this bullshit unresolved, without having talked to anyone since walking off the show, I boarded a plane with Teddy, Brian, Jason, and the rest of the guys, and flew to Amsterdam, Holland, for 4 days of male bonding and good times. I was at the very height of my heroin addiction, by the way, which, factoring travel, lies, and other people, made for a perfectly tossed salad of shit dressed in a piss vinaigrette. Our fight on the air was a giant danger sign to everyone around me, most of whom didn't think I'd come back alive from a city infamous for liberal drug laws and an ample supply of heroin, pills, and hookers. They saw a sugar-mad kid heading unattended into Candyland. Things started out all right because I slept through most of the flight, but what really helped was that I was booked into a different hotel than the other guys. I had the cash to burn, so I'd booked a suite in a 5-star establishment a couple of miles away from them. The first night I crashed hard because I still had a lot to sleep off. But by 4 p.m. the next day I was rested and ready to begin my version of a well-earned vacation. Isolation and getting high. I had no problem celebrating Jason's upcoming nuptials my way, because in my mind that was still honoring him. So I got into a cab and told the driver to find me some fun. He took one look at me and made a beeline for the red light district, where I bought a bunch of pills from some guy on the street who was wearing a beret. I remember wondering if that was Amsterdam code for dealer holding. As a rule, berets piss me off on sight, and I refused to talk to anybody wearing them, but this guy got a pass for life. He had every opiate I'd ever heard of. So I bought a sack of his pills, then went looking for a hooker, which is my chaser of choice for a double shot of opiates. I found myself a solid 7 and negotiated a rate that would get her back to my hotel. This chick was a hooker through and through, which is really what you want when hiring a prostitute. Any guy who kids himself that a woman for hire is his girlfriend, even while it's happening, is a complete idiot. The fucking business is a fucking business, so act accordingly and everyone will go home happy. This broad was amazing, just completely a prostitute. There was no way anyone at the hotel, from the bellboy to the bartender to the desk clerk manning the graveyard shift, was going to address her as Mrs. Lange. And she was so accommodating. As high as I was at the time, I will never forget how understanding she was that I hadn't changed my American dollars into euros. She and I spent the rest of the night talking, while crushing and snorting every flavor we could find in the bag of pills I'd scored. She spoke decent English. But we only had sex once, because like drug addicts will do, the time we spent together was all about the drugs. I was enjoying myself. So the next day I refused to get in touch with the other guys, even though they'd left me a few messages. I remembered back to shooting Dirty Work in Toronto in 1998 with Chris Farley. because Farley would pay Horace to just sit around, smoke weed with him, and keep him company because he was lonely. That's where my head was at. After banging her once, I was fascinated by the idea of paying a pretty woman to be my friend for the day. I was as far gone as Farley had been. I just wanted to spend an afternoon with a friend who wouldn't judge any awful thing I did. When it comes to hookers, the sex is secondary, in my opinion. The love you rent from them isn't real, but it's unconditional. And when you're a using, struggling drug addict, love and a lack of judgment are exactly what you need. I never got her real name, but I did make one up for this broad. In my mind, I started calling her Whore Guide, because the moment we got outside, she'd start giving me the history of the city. She was incredible. I started enjoying her company so much that I dodged all the guys' calls and texts and took her on a cruise through the canals of the city. I was staying at the Dillon, which is a very posh hotel, and there were some sightseeing boats parked outside in the canal waiting to take the rich tourists sightseeing by water. It was downright wholesome. Me, the guy driving the boat, and Whore Guide, taking in Amsterdam's historical highlights together. We saw centuries-old townhouses, government buildings, famous residences, the Anne Frank house. All of this and more lay on either side in all their splendor. Once again, I've got to hand it to Whore Guide. She was one informed whore. She knew more about the history of Amsterdam than the boat tour guide by a long shot. The only thing he taught me was where to get breakfast. That guy, whom for the sake of argument we're going to call Goebbels, had a crisp Dutch accent and high-strung voice. Basically, he sounded like a friendly Nazi, the way a counselor at a Hitler Youth summer camp might be. His Aryan nature became especially clear to me when he started talking about the Anne Frank house, explaining in great detail how her family had hidden in the attic, with the kind of restrained glee that all Nazis have when discussing the suffering of Jews. Now that I think about it, he was more of a repentant Nazi, while highlighting the finer points of the house and Anne Frank's story, as if he didn't want to reveal himself. It was all very rehearsed, and I felt like I was watching Yul Brynner do his 5,000th performance of The King and I. Once he finished talking about the Franks, though, he became his sinister, joyful self again. "Now," he said, his voice getting louder and his eyes getting wider, "if you look just past the Anne Frank house, you see a great place for pancakes." I kid you not. He shouted the word pancakes as if he were saying Heil Hitler. It really was a lovely afternoon, and all three of us got to know each other so well. But as the boat returned to the dock, I didn't kid myself. I knew it was time for Whore Guide and me to part ways. She wandered off down the street, and I went back to my room to get high for a few more hours before crashing out. The next day, I finally contacted Jason and the other guys and met up with them at a cafe near their hotel. This was no coffee joint. It was a Dutch cafe that sold weed, and we hung out all afternoon smoking a bunch of shit. All of us laughed like crazy, had fun, and somewhere in there Teddy and I made up. Afterward, I walked the 2 miles back to my hotel alone, enjoying a really nice marijuana high. As I walked through the streets of Amsterdam that afternoon, everything was beautiful, and I felt at peace taking it all in, especially when I noticed the great place for pancakes that young Goebbels had pointed out up ahead of me. It couldn't have been better timing, because nuclear-powered munchies had set in, and Nazi recommended or not, I can honestly say that those were the best goddamn pancakes I've ever had in my entire life. I planned to fuel up there and then take the Anne Frank tour, but unlike the Nazis, the pancakes won. I didn't have time for the tour after my feast, but I didn't care, because the rest of my walk back to the hotel may have been the most relaxing stroll of my life. That was the last I saw of Amsterdam, because for the rest of the trip I barricaded myself in my room, getting high, sleeping, getting high some more, then sleeping it all off. I'm quite the traveler. I get the most out of my free time in a foreign city. I really should write a series of tour books. The guys tried to hang out with me and kept calling, but they probably knew what was going on. We did all fly home together, and all was well. I heard all about what they'd done every day and night, and they heard all about how exhausted I was from doing stand-up and how happy I was to have caught up on my sleep. Yeah, right. Teddy and I kept working together for another year or so. But after that fight, he demanded that he not be my assistant. He wanted to be my tour manager. I wish he had brought that up while we were still in Amsterdam. I would have turned right around and hired Horguide because she would have been a much better choice. As it turned out, I gave Teddy what he asked for. I made him tour manager to Artie Lange. But fuck him. I still asked him to do the assistant stuff, which he still did half-assed. Whatever, Teddy's a good guy. But by January 2009, he'd had enough of me, regardless of his title, and asked to be let go. I didn't want to, but I said yes. It was the end of an era. Chapter 2. When you get to the bottom, then you'll see me again. Amsterdam was a nice little buffer between hell and me. One that included amazing pancakes, canals, a neo-Nazi, a lot of pills, and a little sex. I consider it one of my better ventures abroad, which I needed to do more of because I'm a creature of habit. But I'll tell you something. As soon as I discharged Horguide, the shit hit the fan. I know how wrong it sounds, but it's true. Saying goodbye to that well-informed whore was a turning-point moment for me. I wasn't in love, and no, we didn't part like Bogey and Bergman in Casablanca. I act dumb, but I'm not stupid. And I mean it when I say that this parting resonated with me in some way I can't explain. It wasn't conscious, but I think I knew that the end of this moment of dysfunctional domesticity with its historical tour and drug snorting meant letting go of the last bit of hope for normalcy in my life. I felt that goodbye down to the very depths of my soul, because I was saying goodbye to trying or caring about keeping things in check. Looking back on all that came next. My soul knew better than the rest of me just how hard I was set to slide. The great comedian Dave Attell warned me about a kind of greed that I was feeding way before it happened to me. I understood the urge he was talking about, but of course I thought I'd always be too strong for it. Dude, you can get addicted to the money, Dave told me late in 2006. Fuck the drugs and booze, that's secondary, you can get rid of those. The worst thing you can get addicted to is the money. He was doing a show Insomniac at the time, so he was in the middle of it all, and had started to get sober. He had a really clear view of things. The money was just like anything else, according to Dave. I didn't agree because I always saw money as something necessary, not something fun like eating the occasional vegetable. I could only see getting addicted to things that are fun. It was necessary to have money to have fun, but money on its own wasn't something I cared to hoard the way I did, say, heroin, coke, and pills. Those are fun. Those were something worth getting addicted to. But money in and of itself? Dave had to be high. I don't remember if he was at the time. But I tell you, he was right. It happened to me. And how could it not? If you grow up without money the way I did, struggle doing stand-up, and then in your 30s start getting offers of $70,000 to fly to St. Louis or Detroit for the weekend, how could you not get high just knowing you'd become worth that much doing something nobody ever thought you'd succeed at? I didn't notice it warping my perception because, like a foster kid who finally finds a home, I was so fucking happy just to be wanted. I didn't care about the schedule, the radio show, or what that plus the drugs were doing to me. After every big-ticket gig I did, before I got used to it, at which point I'd want even more, I'd think to myself, tonight I made more than my father ever made in a year. That meant something to me. And soon it meant everything to me. Dave was right, all right. I got as high on that kind of thinking as I liked to get on Vicodin every morning. I remember Dave telling me that when chasing money started to change his thinking, he felt like it chipped away at his sanity. He felt himself slipping into this craziness and stopped before he sold out and took whatever came his way. Losing his self-respect wasn't worth it to him. He's right about that, too. But I had to learn about that little pearl of wisdom the hard way, through chronic trial and error. Mostly error. A lot of that hard-headedness comes from being a stubborn loser and an Italian-American male, but there's another factor that comes into play. Being a comedian. It doesn't go for every single one of us, but 4 out of 5 dentists would agree that comedians are generally a dark fucking bunch. That bullshit cliché about tears of a clown is pretty true, and I've spent enough years in my disfigured psyche to know from experience. A lot of us funny men and women are like that. But don't ever feel sorry for us, because trust me, we deserve it. Plus, if we sense any degree of pity coming from you, we'll treat you as nicely as we'd treat a wasp at a Christmas Eve dinner. Here's another reason why you should keep your pity to yourself. Comedians like to see things go wrong. We really do, because that's what makes us laugh. W.C. Fields said it best when he was asked what makes a comedian laugh. His answer was one of the funniest and most truthful bit of brilliance ever spoken. If you dress up a man as an old woman and throw him down a flight of stairs, that will make normal people laugh, he said. If you want to make a comedian laugh, you'll need to throw an old woman down the stairs. I couldn't agree more. Once you make funny your reason for being, nothing else but that which pushes the envelope to the extreme is funny to you anymore. This is why I have a hard time with anyone being positive. Positivity is not some spiritually superior state. It's a delusion that is so dull and obvious that I refuse to get behind it because it's just too damn easy. Being all about positivity is like being for world peace. I mean, who isn't for that? It's not like anyone is out there rooting for world war, so world peace is a joke of a cause. It's also a myth, because people like to fight, and because they do, shit happens. Being for world peace is like lobbying for oxygen. It's the kind of thing best left to beauty pageant contestants from places such as South Carolina. Positivity really pisses me off. So as a comedian, I feel it's my duty to do what I can to shoot it down where I find it, which is precisely what my Twitter feed, Artie Lange's Quitter, is all about. The goal of Quitter is to discourage people from trying to do anything at all, because most people aim too high and waste too much time. There's just no point in making statements like, if you work hard enough you can do anything, because it's just not true. I don't care who you are. Sorry, kid. Everyone can't become president of this country if they try hard enough. Aside from the occasional miracle, only white people from old money families can be president. Are you one of them? If you're not, then give up that dream now. If you ask me, everyone needs to take a moment to truly absorb the brilliance of the epitaph of the late great writer Charles Bukowski. It's simple, and it says it all. His gravestone says nothing more than his name, the years he lived, and 2 other words. Don't try. Let this be your mantra, people, because it should be. Seriously, all of you, stop what you're doing, because you're just fucking it all up. Stop now before you do more damage. Please, people, don't try. Because really, you shouldn't. If you're honest with yourselves for a minute, you'll know I'm right. The truly talented people in this world don't talk about the shit they do, they just do it. The average and completely useless, which accounts for most people, spend so much time talking about their lofty plans and goals that they never get further than that. And call me crazy, but there's nothing worse than hearing self-righteous, talentless people blabbering on about the positive, wonderful things they think they are going to do with their lives. They're pathetic. They just need to sit down and take a Xanax. I prefer failures and self-hatred. Failing is honest, because when shit goes wrong and you really fuck it all up, you can't lie about it. It's like robbing a bank and having the paint bomb in the cash go off in your face. You can't hide a fuck-up like that because your face is blue. I think there's some kind of truth in mistakes that big, because at least they're honest. I'd rather fail at being anything than succeed at being positive. I don't want to go to a Tony Robbins seminar and be accepted into his inner circle. I want to make fun of Tony Robbins, which, ironically, I'd find much more therapeutic, personally. I have a feeling Tony would almost respect that if he spent enough time with me to understand what I'm made of. Tony Robbins is such an icon of positivity that I experienced perverse joy telling people on the air on the Nick and Artie show how I had become one of his followers and had been granted access to one of his most exclusive get-togethers, the running of the deer. That special exercise reflects the very heart of Tony's personal philosophy, I'd tell them, and it's something he reserves only for select friends and celebrities. As my story would go, Tony had heard about the changes I'd strived to make in my life and decided to invite me to get up early in the morning at 5 a.m. and accompany him as he ran with the deer. He thought it might help me find the light at the end of my personal tunnel. After some trip I took to L.A., I told the audience that this dream had come true, and that I'd run with Tony, Nicole Richie, Jason Alexander, and Chad Ochocinco, plus Tony's pack of deer. We defecated with them and all rediscovered our primal nature. I'm not sure what this says about me or my fans, but most of those listeners who called in that night had believed my stories, so I couldn't find a reason why I shouldn't keep it up. I went on about it for 4 days, after which time I began to feel so positive because of this deception that I just couldn't take it anymore. I literally had sunshine coming out of my ass and was so happy that I had to do something about it. So I told them all that I was lying, and then I felt better about things again. Getting people to believe whatever the hell I wanted them to became the backbone of what Howard and the Stern Show came to call Artie's Wild Year. 2008. The year my book came out, the year the money and drugs took over, the year that everything started to go wrong. They even commemorated that special time with a special episode that captured what was going on in front of the curtain, at least, which was a fraction of the chaos. I had, despite Dave Attell's warnings, gotten completely hooked on greed, and took every gig, everywhere, no matter how tired I was. I'm not sure if I believed myself every time I looked at my schedule and blocked out the weeks when I planned to detox and calm down. All I know is that every time I set those dates, I broke them as soon as a paying gig came along. The thing is, I had learned to tell people what they wanted to hear years before that. Now that I'm sober, aside from the odd fuck-up, more on that later, I've gotten the most satisfaction from tracing just how far back my dysfunction started. When the greed set in, things definitely got worse, but they were already bad. Let me show you what I mean. Back in '07, I played the Playboy Mansion for some charity event. I only made $10,000, but I didn't care. I had played Vegas the weekend before and made $100,000 at the Hard Rock. Plus, fuck it, I was playing the Playboy Mansion. This was a Rat Pack-level achievement in my mind, and I couldn't wait. They had all kinds of talent there that day. There was some band set up to play after me, and Sarah Silverman was on the bill, too. The stage was in the grotto area, where I planned to have sex with some bunny after my set. As I took the stage, Teddy, who was my assistant at the time, went and got high with Sarah Silverman over by the world-famous monkey cages, whose inhabitants are known for masturbating openly and throwing their jizz at many a random passerby. Sarah is world-famous for having the most insane weed, which she does. Her shit is just ridiculous. Or maybe that's just how I see it. Here's why. Back in the 90s, in 1993, I believe, she and I played a place called the Luna Lounge on the Lower East Side, and that night someone got the both of us high. I don't even think it was Sarah, but we got so high that I don't remember much else. I have no idea how I did on stage. I have no idea how she did. I don't remember anyone else or anything at all, aside from one thing. All that I remember clearly is that I ended up disrupting the lives of the 10 people on the bus I shared with them back to Jersey from Port Authority sometime around 3 a.m., by standing on my head and yelling at them, letting them know that I had evil in my mind, and that I had to get it out. I guess I thought it would run right out of my skull if I did a headstand. Judging by how my life has gone since then, I was wrong. Anyway, I went on stage at the mansion while Sarah and Teddy went and smoked weed by the monkey cages. It's probably good that they weren't there to witness me bomb. I can't lie anymore. I really sucked. It didn't help that Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers, was there with a huge entourage. Plus, the servers were a pack of hot chicks, which meant there were many reasons not to listen to me. I had to do 20 minutes to get the 10 grand. But 2 minutes into it, I started wondering how the fuck I would fill the next 18 minutes, because what little self-esteem I had shown up with that day was somewhere below the stage. I started taking healthy swallows of scotch from a tall glass I kept behind me on the drum riser. After going back for what seemed like my 15th, I went to set the drink back down and stepped on something slippery. It was something the color and texture of French dressing, and since nothing has been confirmed or denied, I'm going with that. In any case, French dressing, or dressing of any kind, had no business being on that stage, because among other things it could have done, it caused my foot to slide out from under me, and like the world's fattest cheerleader, I dropped into an awkward split. I caught myself before I hit the ground, but in the process I completely blew out the seam of my pants. They were basically a tent without a door in a matter of seconds. From taint to waist, the seat of my pants was fully separated, leaving my ass comfortably hanging in the breeze, except that I wasn't alone in my backyard. The thing is, I was bombing so badly that I'm not sure anyone in the audience even noticed this. And my ass was facing them when it happened, but not one person reacted in any way. I know this because by then, just 3 minutes into this fiasco, I was already hyper-attuned to every breath those ignoring me motherfuckers took. All I heard was the unconcerned, self-involved chatter of their cocktail party chit-chat. I heard hot chicks laughing above the noise of plates of food being delivered. I could have broken my neck or had a heart attack and no one would have noticed. There was a clock at the side of the stage that I could see too easily from wherever I stood, and that clock became my personal hell for the next 17 minutes, as I watched it ticking away each minute I had to endure insult and injury to get my money. After my pants split in two, despite the fact that no one probably noticed, I shuffled up to the mic, keeping my ass to the back of the stage, where the band's instruments were. And when I got there, I just started mumbling, because I literally had nothing. I'd been doing stand-up for 15 years by then. I'd seen all kinds of shitty rooms and taken on disinterested crowds, but all of the defenses I'd built up were nowhere to be found. I was reminded that day that no matter how great you think you are, shit like this can happen at any time, and when it does, you probably won't be ready for it. I did what anyone completely unprepared would do. I kept mumbling. It was pathetic. Did I mention that I was at the Playboy Mansion? Out in the crowd, the dudes at Jerry Buss's table were starting to make out with the girls, because all of them were probably on ecstasy. They were all touching each other, and that's when I realized that I could not be more insignificant in this scheme of things. That reality check might have broken my spirit, but it wasn't so earth-shattering that I lost sight of what I had to do to get paid. The gig was below my usual fee, and it seemed like all I was going to get out of this was humiliation, so I was determined to get the cash. By then I had wandered my way through 9 minutes, so I had 11 left to go. That might not seem like a lot in the real world, but in stand-up minutes, that's a fucking lifetime. If you don't believe me, bring your best jokes to the next open mic comedy night in your hometown, and then tell me how you do. You can tell those jokes at home to your friends, you can time yourself and think you've got it all figured out, but you don't. When you're up there, minutes are hours. Trust me. So I had the equivalent of one of the Police Academy movies left on the clock, and I had no idea what to do. Considering how well my other material was going over, I did the only thing that made sense to me and started singing Dixieland as interpreted by my Elvis impression. I felt no need for an extravagant setup. Everybody, sometimes I like to pretend I'm Elvis. That had to get people's attention. No such luck. Maybe this song would do it. Oh, baby, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Oh, times there not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, look away. No one looked, not even once, toward the stage. Anyone who's heard me knows I'm not a good singer, and most of my impressions are obnoxious, so you'd think that the racket of me on the microphone alone would have alarmed somebody. Anybody. Nope, not that night. Not a fucking soul. I should have announced that an ICBM was headed toward Los Angeles. I looked at the clock again and saw that I had about 6 minutes left. I figured I'd started something with this Elvis thing, so I should stick with it. How could I go back to jokes after exposing them to my singing voice? I dipped into my bag of songs and pulled out the only thing that made sense. "You know something, ladies and gentlemen," I said, still imitating Elvis. "I really like it when Elvis sings this here song. It really is one from the Great American Songbook." And then I launched into my way. And now the end is near. I started camping it up, too. Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. The end is near. For the first time, people started laughing. But I knew what was going on. They weren't laughing with me. But I soon realized they weren't even laughing at me. By that point, I would have jumped for fucking joy to be laughed at or made fun of. Nope, the dudes busting up at Table 5 were laughing at whatever stupid jokes the hot waitresses were telling them. I could not catch a fucking break. These girls, all of them 19, on ecstasy, and asking where Jerry Bruckheimer's house was, were getting more laughs than I was. I dragged my exposed ass through my way and made that piece of shit last as long as I could. I drew in as much breath as I could, and I think I held the last way for at least 1 minute and 35 seconds. I had one eye on the clock, hoping I could end on this high note, but that wasn't going to happen. I still had 4 minutes to go. 4 minutes of hell ahead and no turning back, so I launched right into Hey Jude. To make matters worse, I forgot the words, which on any other night I know by heart. As anyone who has ever tried to sing Hey Jude can tell you, there's only one way out of it if you forget the words. Head right into the na-na-nas and pray for the best. Well, I did that way too early. I did it after like the 3rd line of the first verse. It was a complete train wreck, but considering my set overall, I think it was the highlight. I was so painfully aware of just how bad I was that I wondered if the guy paying me was going to try to skip out on my check. I mean, technically, he could claim that I didn't do a stand-up set, seeing how I'd opted to perform so many of my well-honed musical routines. There are only so many na-nas a man can do, and when I'd exhausted them, the clock of doom informed me that I still had 2 minutes left. Fuck me, I thought. Then I started singing a truly earnest version of Happy Birthday, somewhere between Marilyn Monroe's Serenade of JFK and a crackhead trying to impress his dealer. I know it's somebody's birthday in the house tonight, and I promised them I'd sing them a song, so join me, won't you, ladies and gentlemen, in wishing that person, wherever they are, a happy one. For the first time during those 20 minutes, I actually started enjoying what I was doing. So much that I actually went over the scheduled 20 minutes by 90 seconds. I was really proud of that. Thank you, everyone. Good night, I said after I wrapped up the song. You've been really great. It was a horrible night, but I knew there was some kind of prize awaiting me. I had heard that after the performances were done there would be whores galore, and that they were all fair game. With paid-for sex dangling as the carrot that would numb my embarrassment, I shuffled off stage, keeping my air-cooled ass turned away from the audience's eye. Great job, great fucking job, man. the MC for this fine event said to me, nodding his head like a nutcracker as he took the mic from my hand. Clearly he was high, or maybe he'd been nowhere near the stage during my set for the last 20 minutes because he was so enthusiastic that he clearly wasn't busting my balls. "Give it up one more time for Artie Lange," he shouted into the mic. No one clapped, no one cheered, no one did anything. I laughed out loud because that moment was funnier than anything I'd done up there, asking them to give it up one more time as if they'd even given it up one time. The band played a few songs as I stood there feeling like a loser, wanting another drink but not wanting to walk anywhere with my ripped-open pants. My mind was consumed with just one crystal-clear thought. Where the fuck is Teddy? We've already covered how much I love the kid, as well as how much he is capable of pissing me off. But I have to say this night took the prize. Standing there with ripped pants, with no assistant in sight, I was pretty justified in my anger. I needed pants to cover my ass, and I needed painkillers to cover my shame, and hopefully a whore to make me forget about all of it for the time it took her to blow me. This was the kind of party where pills were everywhere. That was obvious. But I wasn't in any condition to go asking around. I expected Teddy to do it. As I stood there with my ass to a hedgerow, my blood began to boil because the kid was nowhere to be found. By that point, the pain of my failure on stage had sobered me up, and just then one of the two guys in charge of the event came over to me. "Great job, Artie. We really loved it," he said. He had to be kidding. "Thanks, man," I said. I knew I had to try something special for this crowd, you know? This guy had to be fucking with me. "Well, you really did great. I mean it," he said with a big grin. Then I noticed the camera behind him, taping us. If my pants were in one piece, I would have shit them. "That's cool, man. I'm so glad you enjoyed it." "So, the camera. Are you taping us?" "Yes, we are." "Did you tape my set, too?" "We did, but it's just for our purposes." "Oh, yeah?" I said. "What are your purposes?" "Well, it's just a souvenir of the night," he said, smiling. I kind of wanted to punch him. "A souvenir?" I asked. "What am I, a bobblehead?" "That's funny, Artie," he said, slapping my shoulder. "We're just going to show it in-house." In my mind, that was worse than having 12-year-olds in Nebraska poring over it on YouTube. What kind of viewing party were they saving it for? If anyone ever watched it, they'd see every bit of the crap sandwich I'd made that night. "Oh, that's cool, man," I said. "It's not going to end up anywhere, though, right?" "No, not at all." After that exchange, he left for a minute and came back with my check for $10,000, which I immediately noticed wasn't made out to Too Fat to Fish, Inc., as it should have been. It was made out to R.D. Lange, a famous Scottish psychiatrist who specialized in treating psychosis. He also died in 1989. This is what I pay Teddy for, isn't it? I thought. I didn't want to have a conversation with this guy about the check. I wanted to get into some new pants. I wanted pills and booze, and I wanted to be first in line when the hooker bus showed up. Where the fuck was Teddy? Hey, man, thanks for the check, but it's made out to the wrong guy. I'm not R.D. Lange, I said. From what I understand, he was a great man, but he's dead. The check should be made out to Too Fat to Fish. What? Saying that name turned more heads than any joke I'd said all night. Too Fat to Fish, what's that? He asked. It's the name of my corporation. It comes from something my mother said once. There were a pair of girls talking to us, and one of them thought this was literally the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "Too fat to fish?" she squealed. "That's so funny. Where does that come from?" The last thing I wanted to do with my ass hanging out, an empty drink, and no opiates in sight was tell some broad who didn't seem like a sure thing the Too Fat to Fish story. I told it half-assed and without the usual enthusiasm I bring to it, and it went over just about as well as my set had. When I finished it, the promoter guy and the chicks were staring at me blankly. "That's it?" one of them asked. "Yeah," That's it, I said. I thought there would be, more to it, the other chick said. The promoter guy started laughing. I'm sorry, J.D. Salinger, I said to her, but that's as complex as the narrative arc is going to get in this tale. Fuck her. That bitch was straight off the bus from Kansas City, destined to fuck Pauly Shore as her greatest achievement, and she was critiquing my storytelling? Hey, man, can you cut me a new check tonight? At least I hope to get out of there with my money. My dignity, what little I had, was a long-lost cause. No, R.D., I'm sorry, we'll have to mail it to you, the guy said. Jesus, really? How much worse could this night get? The answer, my friends, is much, much worse. By the way, they did mail me the check, but it took 8 months and a few phone calls to get it. Fucking R.D. Lange. So I'm standing there at the Playboy Mansion, just a complete wallflower, with my ass to the bushes, having, in every way, the opposite experience that James Caan had his first time there. From 74 to 76, he held the record for fucking consecutive playmates, or so I've heard. His memory of his time there, however, has probably been lost in a jungle of enormous 70s bush. Anyway, I'd been dreaming of coming to this place since I was a teenager, and I'd finally made it. But there I was, unable to move, just bombing and repulsing people over and over. I mean, literally, as I wandered around, everyone I met looked at me as if I'd just puked on them. It was terrible. Just then I finally caught sight of Teddy, who was down by the monkey cages laughing hysterically with Sarah Silverman, whom I'd had a crush on since 1992, and because of that I was beyond furious. They were having the time of their lives while I suffered through one of the worst sets of my career, and I was paying that kid to be there. I decided that if they started making out, if I had to watch him kiss her, I would gladly do the time in prison for the joy I'd have received choking him to death with my bare hands. Can you blame me? I was still standing there in ripped pants. What the fuck? Teddy! I shouted. Teddy! He didn't hear me. Of course he didn't. So I shuffled along the hedge, keeping my bare ass to the bush, inching closer to them. My blood was boiling, literally boiling, with every inch I crept closer. I got within 4 feet, and fuck you, man, I was fuming by then. Teddy! He turned, looked at me, then walked over. Oh, hey, he said, as if we were old friends running into each other at a high school reunion. Just all full of good times and hugs. What's going on? What are you doing? What am I doing? I asked, barely choking back my rage. I don't know, Teddy. What am I doing? Well, let's see. I just did stand-up comedy, which is the whole reason we are here. We, meaning you and me. You're aware of that, right, Teddy? That's what I've been doing. Earning money. So how have you been? What have you been doing? What have I been doing? He said. Then he started giggling. Yeah, Ted. What have you been doing? What are you doing? Just then Sarah came up and was super nice in that condescending, patronizing bullshit way that she always is, and I love her for that character she plays, but wow, it couldn't have been worse timing. I still loved her then and now because she just walked up and gave me a hug. Do you want some pot? She asked. Yeah, I do. Oh, man, that's too bad. I don't have any more, she said, grinning, all cute. That's because she and Teddy had smoked all of it. Aw, fuck me. And you don't have any more. Or anything better? No, man, she said. That's all I've got. Check you later. I've got to go on stage right now. Off she went, and she went on, and she killed. Now, she destroyed. She got more laughs than George Carlin at Carnegie Hall, like, ever. I'm serious, and I hate to admit this kind of shit. Sarah, that night at the mansion, made every dipshit within range completely crack up whether they wanted to or not, and I hated her for it. I couldn't even believe I'd been up in front of the same people. When she was finished, she bopped off the stage and gave me another big hug. I mean, really? "So how was your set?" she asked. I wasn't even sure if she was being a bitch at that point. That's how subversive she was. "Whatever," I said. "Oh," she said, completely overdoing it. "Yeah, not good. I get it." "All right. I mean, it was fine. It was... whatever." "It happens, man." And off she bounced into the night, smug as a bug in a fucking rug. She was right. I mean, it does. But this night, it was killing me. And I'd paid my assistant to make sure I didn't feel this pain. "Ted, let me ask you something," I said, turning to him, hating his stoned Cheshire cat grin. "Where the fuck were you while I was on stage?" "We went to the monkey cages and got high, that's all," he said. "She had pot. And she's really nice." "She's really nice? Why don't you go fucking be her assistant then, Ted? I fucking needed you. I got off stage and ripped my pants. You even aware of that?" Teddy was so high that the minute he heard me say I ripped my pants, he doubled over laughing. I know what that's like, and I've been there, but the more he laughed, the madder I got. I wanted to kill him, like more than I usually wanted to kill him, because I wanted to kill that little cocksucker quite often. He could barely breathe, but when he could, he started calling Sarah over. She was a few feet away, surrounded by a circle of well-wishers fawning over her after her set. "Hey," I said, "don't you dare call her over here, Teddy. No, I'm fucking serious." He could tell I was mad, so he stopped. But he couldn't control his laughter, or how red his face was at that point. If I'd told him that an asteroid was going to obliterate L.A. in 5 minutes, he would have laughed. If I'd told him his parents had been killed in a car accident, he would have laughed. He was a mechanical clown in a funhouse, just laughing and laughing and laughing. I wanted to kill him. "Dude, I know you're high, but you have to get me some fucking pants. Do you understand what I'm saying?" More laughing. "Teddy! Hey, fuckhead! Go be high, but do it now. Get me pants. This isn't funny." Looking back, it amazes me that I kept him on for another 6 months. I know I was fucked up, but whose assistant is so inefficient that they can't find their boss a pair of sweatpants at the Playboy Mansion? Teddy was a waste of time, money, and space. "Dude, get yourself together," I said. "Get me some pants, a triple scotch on the rocks, and a pint glass, and a handful of pills, right now." "Why can't you get your own drink? I've got to get the pants. That's a lot to do." He said that to me, and he wasn't kidding. Now, listen, I'm not even sure if that kind of attitude happened due to me or if it was all that little snot-nosed bitch's fault. All I know is that I never really wanted to hear that kind of entitled attitude again. "Teddy," I said, inhaling slowly, trying to calm down, knowing I was way beyond calm. "I can't get the scotch, Teddy, but I'd like to. Want to know why I can't get the scotch, Teddy? Because my fucking pants are ripped." That, of course, sent him into hysterics and made me homicidal. "You're right. I forgot about that," he said, completely serious but laughing still, and headed off toward the bar. He was that high. The little prick. The first thing he did right that whole day was come back immediately with my drink, at which point I told him he needed to score me pills, any kind of pills, as fast as possible. "Why do you want pills?" "Because I want to be high. High like you, Teddy, high off my fucking ass, laughing and having fun. Fucking fun, Teddy. Since you and Sarah smoked all the pot, I'm stranded. I need pills. Get me a Vicodin. Get me one right fucking now. This place is crawling with shit like that. Scoring for you is against my morals, Art. I won't do it." "Against your morals? Really? Your morals? How much do those cost to circumvent?" "I've told you, I won't score for you." Your morals allow you to get high and talk to monkeys instead of doing your job and taking care of me while I'm on stage, though, right? That's different. You have a problem with drugs. Oh, right, I guess I do. Yes, Teddy, I have a problem with drugs. No, I'd say you have a problem with drugs because I don't have any. I need pants and drugs, and you have neither of them for me. So as my assistant, you need to handle my PVS, pants, Vicodin, scotch. Now get going, and don't come back here empty-handed, you stupid little fuckwit. He didn't look happy. But then again, he never looked happy whenever he had to actually do something for me. As usual, a threatening tone yielded results. First came another large scotch, which, much like the first, I treated the way a marathon runner would Gatorade. I sent him off again, demanding drugs and pants. Call me a skeptic, but I wasn't willing to put my faith entirely in Teddy's hands. So I called over a scummy-looking staffer and proceeded to tell him about my knee injury. You know the one that had started acting up, the one I got operated on for a few months back. That imaginary injury was just about killing me that night after my run-in with the French dressing, so I needed something to kill the pain. Man, I must have torn my injury wide open tonight. Can you get me something? In about 14 seconds, he came back with 50 Percocet. And being a true scumbag, he wanted to charge me $12 a pill for them, which, being a seasoned drug addict, I knew was a little high. Really, I was something to be proud of during my Playboy Mansion debut. I was the picture of class. Ripped pants, a pint glass full of scotch, a useless red-eyed assistant in tow, haggling over the price of a pile of Percocet. At this point, does it matter that I did 20 minutes and bombed beyond belief? Honestly, I'm not sure. I had $280 on me, so I couldn't afford all 50 pills because this fucking guy wasn't budging on his price. Really, dude? If I weren't so desperate, I would have lectured him about it, but I was, so I did what I could and bought 20 of them, which came out to $240. Of course, seeing as this wasn't in any way my night, I didn't have exact change, so I gave the guy $250. "I'll be right back with a 10 for you, man," he said. "You'll be right here?" "Yeah," I replied, knowing he wouldn't, yet still hoping that he'd come back with my $10. I didn't get depressed about it for long. I had a bag of pills to swallow, and I got into it immediately. The only problem I had was that I was still a fucking slob wearing half a pair of pants, and my assistant was still nowhere to be found. The mansion is decadent, and there were people making out half-dressed here and there, but it wasn't a scene out of Caligula by any means. Being sexy, touchy, and debauched is one thing. Munching pills hand over fist out of a Ziploc bag out in the open is another, and that's what I was doing. Teddy finally came back around then, and for whatever reason I asked him what he thought I should do about munching these pills at this party. I mean, why did I? But I did. And what did I expect this kid to say other than just one more retarded, idiotic piece of non-wisdom? I really don't know what the fuck is wrong with me when it comes to some of the people I keep around me, let alone pay for their services. I very well may never have crashed and burned if I'd been smart and just made whore guide TM my assistant. Teddy encouraged me to just walk to the bathrooms and not worry about my ripped-up, open-assed pants or anything else, and to go take my pills. "It's the Playboy Mansion. No one's going to look," he said. "Fuck it," I said. I was desperate. I had to turn this night around. I walked to the porta-johns, pants ripped from balls to waist, French dressing on my sneakers, a warm, half-empty pint glass of scotch in hand, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I'd be allowed to have fun at the mansion. When I was about 50 feet from the porta-john, I heard hysterical laughter behind me, like crazy person loud. It was fucking Teddy, still so high that he couldn't help himself. It wasn't just the sight of my ripped pants. It was me. That little piece of shit was laughing all out of control. He sounded insane. He was half crying. He was doubled over like some gleeful maniac, making such a scene that everyone nearby was looking at him, wondering what the fuck was going on? He couldn't contain himself, that little prick. He was pointing at me, crying, cackling at my fat, briefs-covered ass. There were people pointing in disgust, and all of them made me want to crawl inside my skin and never come out. I shuffled as fast as I could into the can, that porta-john, spilling my scotch the whole way. I slammed that blue plastic door behind me, and finally, I was safe. And fuck them, I didn't care anymore. I had enough pills to get high. I had enough pills to get so high that nothing they could do or say would ever fucking affect me. I wouldn't give a shit what anybody thought the next time I opened that door. I reached into my pocket to get the pills, and I came up with nothing. I dropped my bag of Percocet. I dropped it somewhere between the bar and the bathroom door. Really, this night could not get any fucking better. Just then I heard a knock at the door and thought more than twice about opening it. Anyway, I did so slowly, just a crack. And I met a young girl who introduced herself as one of the associate producers of the event, which is Hollywood code for bullshit artist who gets people coffee. "You dropped something," she said, handing me my bag of pills. She was very nonplussed. "What is this stuff?" she asked. "Oh, that's just aspirin. Prescription aspirin. I get bad headaches. Thank you so much." "Come on, I'm not stupid," she said. That was debatable. Well, okay. It's not aspirin. It's something stronger. I've got a condition. Listen, you're not going to write about this, right? You are a publicist, aren't you? You realize that certain realities should be kept out of the press? Yes, I'll make sure of that. We are here for charity, but you should get yourself together. I excused myself, which was easy since I was already in the toilet, locked myself into the darkness of the porta-john, and started eating my Percocet as if they were Flintstones chewables, taking down 5 in one swallow of scotch. The thing about painkillers and opiates of any kind is that they make you nauseous, even if you're an addict who loves them, like I do, and does them all the time. I felt queasy, but I didn't care. I kept going until the inevitable happened. I threw up. Actually, that's an understatement. What I did was hose down the entire porta-potty with vomit as if I were a fire hose and there was a fire. It was violent, projectile-style puke, and it coated the walls, the toilet, and the urinal in waves for about 3 minutes straight. Everyone outside heard it, believe me. I can still hear the echoes, and I'm sure they still can. After the storm subsided, I heard a knock at the door. "Boss?" Teddy asked quietly. "Boss? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just threw up." For a millisecond, I thought that Teddy might actually care about me. Then that motherfucker started laughing again. Fuck him. I wiped the puke off myself as best I could with whatever still dry, limp toilet paper I could find. I didn't have the means to get all of it off of me. I knew there was puke in my beard, and I could smell it on me, above and beyond the smell of shit and plastic that had permeated the air beforehand. To me, I'd made it through the rain, so I ate a few more Percocet, because there was no fucking way I wasn't getting high tonight. I fucking deserved it. I'd crapped on stage. Please, what else was there besides getting fucked up by now? I'd eaten 5 pills and thrown them up. And since I still felt nothing, I ate 4 more. Don't judge me until you've had a night like this. If you do, I suggest you take all of the pills you can find right away. That was my plan. And here's how it went down. I'd bought 20 pills, and I'd gone through 9, and I needed to save some for the plane. At that point, if I didn't have access to heroin, I was up to about 15 painkillers a day. So I was cutting it close. I looked down and saw 3 full Percocets, completely untouched, sitting there in my puke. I'd sucked them down so quickly that I hadn't gotten a chance to chew them. Aside from the puke, they were virtually brand new. I was such a fucked-up addict by then that I picked them up without hesitation and put them in the Ziploc bag for later. I got puke all over the bag in the process, but that didn't matter because now it matched my shirt, my beard, and the rest of me. By then my high was actually kicking in, so everything had suddenly become beautiful in my mind. I didn't give a shit about the stares I received when I left the bathroom. Who were those fucking people anyway? I was high, I had no pants, and I had one mission: dealing with Teddy's insubordination. I started arguing with him immediately, telling him that if I were a corporation and he were an employee, even if he were a high-ranking executive, he would be fired on the spot for his performance that night. It sucked. The kid was so stoned that nothing I could say got through to him. So he was, at best, half-heartedly apologetic for his lack of being the least bit on point. I fucking couldn't stand that shit, so I told him the only way to redeem himself was to find me pants, and if he didn't, he'd be dead by the end of the week. At that point, I didn't care about the pants anymore. I was so high that the wind on my ass was actually quite refreshing, and I was amused at all the idiots who kept pointing at me and giggling. Meanwhile, Teddy had come down enough to realize that I was his boss and that he should probably take me seriously. And so things got even sillier. I'd gotten two of my friends into the mansion that night, the actor Jimmy Palumbo, who played Johnny Trino in Beer League, and my friend Anthony, who produced it. Those two morons rolled up in Jimmy's 1982 Honda Civic. There were lines of limos, Bentleys, Maybachs, you name it, in that driveway, accompanied by one completely shitty Civic, with my friends in it. I was standing there with one of the promoter guys when my buddies pulled up, and the guy looked over at me like he was missing the joke. I mean, there was no joke, and that's the point he was missing. He then told me that my friend's car made me look bad, and that I should never, ever have them back to the mansion or any other place I wanted to make a good impression. Yeah, I said, I'll remember that. I told him not to take the nice car because this one would make me look more down to earth. His frown said it all. My ripped pants, scruffy beard, and Scotch and Percocet eyes were the epitome of class, so those losers in that car were definitely bringing me down. Just after my boys showed up, I noticed that the ladies of the night had arrived, and it was a very dark night. These were the most hardcore, and I mean fucking hardcore whores I've ever seen in my life. These were $20 crackhead cocksuckers from the mean streets of Compton, and without a doubt I'd say a whopping 2 out of 150 of them were legitimately cute. It looked like for some this night at the mansion was BYOB, bring your own bunny. It was never like that back in the day, which depressed me. But I was very high by then, so I didn't give a fuck for long. My buddy Anthony asked one of the two cute ones how much a blowjob would cost him. $1,000, she said. Get the fuck away from me, he said. You're crazy. She was, because she wasn't that hot, and I'm pretty sure that even if you tapped Tiger Woods' finest talent, you'd get more than a blowjob for $1,000. Still, and this was the drugs talking to me, I sat there wondering what $1,000 blowjob felt like. What could she or any other chick possibly do to justify that price tag? I half-heartedly decided I'd try to find out. So it's $1,000 for a blowjob, but what would you do for some Percocet? I asked her. Nothing. I have my own, she said, looking at me suspiciously. Oh, you do? You like Percocet? How much does it cost to buy your Percocet? I asked. A blowjob is $1,000. How much is the Percocet? They're not for sale. I don't do that, she said. No, you don't. So you're only a whore? I asked. You should think about diversifying your interests and pursuing drug sales. You really should cover a few other markets, honey. She probably didn't even have Percocet. She probably didn't even know what it was, because she got so mad that she stormed off and told all the girls within earshot that I was a jerk-off. Thanks to me, none of the whores would talk to us, so none of us hooked up. Let me tell you, That was really adding insult to injury, because these girls had no business even being in the same zip code as the Playboy Mansion. They were an insult to everything the place stands for, historically or otherwise. There was no sex in the grotto for me, but that didn't stop everyone else at the party from getting their dicks wet. Before long, it might as well have been 1974. Actually, I wish it had been 1974. I might have seen some hot chicks with feathered hair and great banana boat tits. Instead, I found myself watching a 200-pound hooker with a tattoo of her murdered boyfriend's name across her chest, blowing 3 goofy white record executive types by the pool. I was the only one who saw this as horrifying. Her tits were flabby, her thighs were huge, and there was nothing sexy about any of it. Aside from my personal misfortunes, I'm pretty confident when I tell you that this was the worst night the grotto has ever seen. At least I hope so. If those rocks could talk, they would pretend these events never happened. The thing about drugs is that they can erase all that kind of carnage, or at least make it all seem okay at the time, which is pretty much what happened to me that night. What I was seeing before me became a bad movie that I suddenly wasn't in anymore. Sure, I'd played my role on stage earlier, but I was high now, so that was yesterday as far as I was concerned. All the gross sex I saw was just ugly wallpaper, because everything was fucking fine, man. Want to know why? Because finally I was fucking high. When Teddy showed up with pants, I'd forgotten that I'd ever needed pants. He brought this pair of red silky pajama pants that could have been Hef's cast-offs. By then, that was so cool I couldn't have been happier. Teddy. What a useless, cool guy I employed. I thanked him for those pants, and then I ducked into the bushes, threw my ripped ones deep into the shrubs, and put my new ones on, and when I came back out, I felt like a beautiful mermaid. I strutted my stuff as if I were wearing a $4,000 tuxedo that fit me perfectly. I mean, these things were covering my ass and junk, but that was about it. They were nothing special. Actually, they were tight, and I looked ridiculous. I was also wearing white Nikes that were smeared with orange French dressing, plus my jean jacket and some oversized fat guy t-shirt. So alongside these red pajama pants, I probably looked like Ignatius J. Riley from one of my favorite books of all time, A Confederacy of Dunces. Or at least the way I picture him if he ever walked the earth with you and me. So I was definitely feeling fine. And in my mind, I was looking really fine. And according to me, it was time to give Teddy some payback, because that fucker hadn't done his job. He had it coming, and nothing is better than fucking with some guy who has it coming, especially if your victim is completely stoned on marijuana. It's shooting fish in a barrel. It's clay in the kiln. It's just too easy. And that little prick deserved it. I even knew how I'd fuck with him. I'd make him chase down my incorrectly written check. Ted, listen to me. I need that check tonight. You have to find the guy and have him cut me a new one, I said. Dude, I can get that from him tomorrow. I'm paying you out of that check, Teddy, I said. You don't get that, I've got nothing for you for this weekend of work. That got his attention. Off he went, while my friends and I continued to drink and watch this sad pack of derelict Compton whores sucking and fucking goofballs. About 10 minutes later, Teddy returned, and he told me that the guy had no more checks, which I already knew, and that they'd have to mail it, which I also already knew, because the guy who'd thought my name was Artie Lange had already told me so and taken my address. Man, that sucks, Ted, I said. I'm a little bit disappointed in you. I wanted to give you your money tomorrow. It's just gonna have to wait. Hey, did you tell him the address was wrong, too? No, wait, what? Yeah. He's got the wrong address, too. He's got it going to my mom's, which isn't right. That's gonna delay this even more. Can you go sort that out? This took Teddy at least 45 minutes. Long enough for my friends and me to totally forget about him altogether until he came running up, all proud that he'd gotten it handled. I mean, Jesus, he didn't even suspect that I was fucking with him. which was great because the kid deserved all of it. But I still wasn't done, because there was just one last thing I could think of that could be wrong with the check. Listen, Ted, you probably think I'm crazy, but I didn't give him the full 9-digit zip code for my address in Hoboken. I hate to do this to you, but I've lost checks. I've lost a lot of checks, and I really don't want that to happen anymore. Would you mind running that guy down and making sure he's got the full 9-digit zip on that address? I'm sure you don't feel like doing it, but it's better to handle it now. That kept him occupied for another half hour, by which point, when he finally came back saying he couldn't find the guy, who was probably hiding from Teddy by then if he wasn't being blown by an overweight mother of 8, I decided it was time to go. It was one of the worst gigs I've ever done at one of the top places I've always wanted to play. That's life, though, isn't it? You can sit around thinking that some place is the Taj Mahal, but when you finally get there, you realize it's shit. Who knows? If I didn't care so much about drugs and money, I might have managed to have a good time and maybe even do a good set. I was so in my head that when it started to go wrong up there, the paranoia, the false perception, and the lessened ability that comes with drug abuse defined what happened next. And the only thing that made it go away? Complete obliteration via puke-covered Percocet. Oh yeah, speaking of those, once I got back to my suite at the Park Hyatt in Century City that night, I realized I'd left those at the scene of the crime. They were in my ripped-up pants, deep inside a hedgerow at the Playboy Mansion. Tell you the truth, I hope they're still there. That would be the type of mark I'd be proud of leaving on the mansion. Without a fix of Percocet to get me through the day, my flight home was going to be more of a living hell than my set had been, times 10. I was in first class and Teddy wasn't. So the only joy I got was laughing at him as he shuffled his lazy ass back to coach. He was hungover and I knew it. And in reality, that was all I had, aside from the obvious. Ways to feel superior to him. "See you later, loser," I shouted as he shuffled by. "Maybe I'll bring you something to eat, jerk-off. I'll let you know how the warm brownie and ice cream taste. Hey, did they give you champagne when you first enter coach? Ted, don't worry. I'll come see you after I watch my favorite episode of Taxi. Yeah, really funny." I could make fun of him all I wanted, but it didn't matter. I was the one who was truly fucked. No amount of alcohol could soothe the raging, toxic headache brewing in my brain. 15 minutes into the flight, I got the sweats because my withdrawals had set in. As soon as the seatbelt light went off, I was pacing up and down the aisles, asking for more scotch, praying that the anxiety and sweats and itch would go away, and knowing that they wouldn't. I'd planned it wrong. I'd not brought enough stuff to get me back to my home base in one piece. But all was not lost. I knew that I just had to get through the flight to be able to get myself shipshape again. Luckily, I was met by a very, shall we say, understanding driver whom I had ridden with before. He picked me up at the airport that day, took one long look at me, and said, "Where are we going, man? I don't think you're going home just yet." "No, man, I'm not," I said. "I'm in bad shape." I borrowed a few $100s off him. I told you he was amazingly understanding. And I won't tell you where we went to score, but I can tell you it rhymes with Schmarlem. That night got me about 200 Vikingen, and this guy was wise. I'd have to pay him that cash back with 10% interest. That's how it was, and I considered it normal. Ah, fuck it, I don't even know if I thought it was normal. I didn't give a fuck what it was anymore. It was my life.